good morning, dear ones. I'm Rev Briz,
And I'm Rev Z.
and together we're a couple of ministers talking shit. Welcome to episode number 13 of our weekly podcast. Those listeners that have been with us recently know that we've really tried to dive into the topic of race in America and what's going on and understand that a little bit better. Today we're going to take a little deviation from that topic specifically. It still plays a part in what we're talking about here, but we're going to take a slight detour on that, and we want to talk about the politics of everything. Also, we could call it the politicization of everything. So, Z, good morning. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning. Good morning. Doing well, and excited about this topic because it is rampant, as one might say.
Exactly. So, if you would, why don't you kick us off and share with the listeners a little bit how we got to this place this morning and how we got to saying this is what we've got to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, recently there's been so much talk about do we wear masks, and if you wear a mask, does that make you one side of the fence or the other side of the fence, or now we have this whole thing about schools opening, and it's a political thing, or Democrats want this, Republicans want this, and I think what's happening is we're getting this whole idea of facts and opinions and facts and analysis so mixed up that people are using it as a whooping post. And even the politicalization of defund the police. Now, I'm sure some of you may have seen that call where they're calling the police and they got them taking numbers for certain crimes, or you got to wait. And it's all about politics. It's not about the truth of the matter. And that's going to cause lots of angst going forward.
Yes, I think it's be already creating quite a bit of angst moving forward. And as you were opening and sharing with us, um, one of the things that jumped into mind is something that one of our guests said a couple weeks back. Reverend Jim Lockhart was with us, and one of the things he said is, in days gone by, at the end of the day, we all went home and read the same news.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we all went home and we watched a half an hour of news. And even though we were all in different homes, we were watching that together. There was from my perspective, and I'm a little bit younger than that, so uh, by the time I get on the scene and realize what's going on, we've got several channels. But still, even then, there were only three, four, three channels. When I first came up, there were three channels,
Mm-hmm.
and we had bite-sized experiences of the news, and then we were left to discuss those things with our neighbors and our
Right.
coworkers, and
Right.
you couldn't go do the research on Google and
You had to
all
go
of
to a
that.
library.
Yeah, wow. There's a whole nother episode. Should we reopen libraries, right?
Yes.
We're pushing to open schools, or why are we, what, anyway. So I think what I'd like to kind of explore in this episode with you folks is not so much how did we get here, because the truth is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everything anymore has been influenced by our own political beliefs, even if we believe we're staying out of politics,
Right.
even if we're saying, oh, I'm opting out, I don't do politics. Uh, I think it was Plato that said, the man, to paraphrase, the man that doesn't do politics is destined to be ruled by far less intelligent men than themselves. So, apologies to Plato for not getting that quote right. But so we're in that right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
We we are each in our own media bubbles. We create, we listen to the news we want to listen to, and we immediately discount anything that comes from the news we don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what do we do with this?
Well, you hit a good point there in that. Um, I think the idea of research has gone down, right? In that um, we have these media outlets who have these short bursts of videos. They can pop a story through or a series of story through in like 7 minutes, and you don't, and as you said, there's so many outlets. Like you were saying, I mean, I remember there were there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and there was a PBS station in my town,
Right.
and at midnight everything went off,
Yeah.
and so the news did not come back on until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. And now there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of TV channels. We haven't even touched radio yet with the digital and the satellite radios. And so you can go and get information from someone else, um, and you have very few ways of verifying it. Or people, back to the original thing, the research. Very few people go out and research to see if that stuff is true or not, and then they take it, no pun, and spread it like a virus,
Yeah.
uh, even though they have not verified one iota of what's being said.
Yeah. Exactly. I and I love the point that you're making. Right. There are countless quote media outlets,
Yep.
and let's be straight up, folks. Right. You're listening to a broadcast, to a podcast that is being presented by New Thought Media Network. We are now. Our intention is to change this game in some way,
Mm-hmm.
to move the needle away from everything is politics, everything is black and white, and we're going to have our intrinsic biases as well. We're going to present programming that we believe will influence you in a positive way, that will make your day better, that will share the good news, that will do the things that uplift and enlighten and support humanity's evolution. It seems to me like mainstream media these days could care less about, well, anything except the almighty dollar.
Exactly. And a prime example of that is this whole political debate, if you will, we have going on now about opening schools. Um,
Yes.
I just this morning I was listening to a superintendent in Florida, my hometown, and he's down in South Florida, and he was speaking on this idea that there are like 67 schools in his district, um, and they're in one of the areas where the virus is rising, and he's saying, you know, we might have 67 different programs going on at 67 different schools because it's going to be based on, not only the students and the parents who may or may not want their kids to go back, but the teachers who have to be there and go through this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's and here in Colorado, at least in Jeffco, there's been this statement about we're going back 100% into the schools,
Yes.
and
I,
that's
uh,
in 4 weeks.
I'm with you. And Reverend LZ and I happen to live not very far away from each other, so we live in the same school district. We're both in Jefferson County School District here in Colorado, and there is a lot of discussion with this announcement, and we're talking about 5 days a week, full contact, no
Yeah.
CDC guidelines. Let me ask you, folks, even in a small school of 500, how many people would it take to keep that school clean enough? How many people now let's look at the other reality. You got 500 kids under the age of 17, 18, under 17 or under. How many of them do you think are really going to wear their masks 100% of the time?
Mhm. Or cover their mouth when they sneeze or cough, and wash their hands when they come out of the bathroom every time.
Or wipe down the handle to the door? Right.
And
We
so this whole thing is being set up as a political thing, as you said, about economics, because the whole thing is we have to get back to work. And yes, we do need to get back to work. There's no doubt that we we have to figure out a way to make this happen. And early on, again, but the politics moved it. There was this whole thing about hybrids, switching kids in and out, doing some at home, doing some at the school,
Yeah.
limiting classes a little bit, or shifting classes so you can have smaller classes with fewer people close together. And I'm not sure what happened with that, but I know there was this whole political idea that killed it.
Yes. And from my perspective, that political ideal is that we got to hold on to the way America was in the 40s and the 50s. We got to go back and, pardon the phrase, folks, but we got to go back and make America great again.
Yeah.
That that mindset that the only way to regain the American glory. Let's be real, folks. We're not very highly regarded on the world stage at this point.
Right.
The only way to do that was to go back and go back and go back. Well, we all know that's not how life works. We all know that I'd love to go back to when I was 20 and have the knowledge I have at 50, right? That'd be a lot of fun to be able to go back,
Yes.
relive. We can't go there. The movement has got to be forward. And this school decision to me absolutely appears to be politically motivated to get to free people to get back into a quote workplace economy. Now, I don't like saying things like this, but I give it till by Labor Day. I think schools are going to be closed again. We open in mid August. I got a feeling by Labor Day they're going to be going, oh shit, we've got an outbreak, and we've got 7 outbreaks across our school, and that's just one school district here.
Right.
I've seen reports that there are states that are threatening to fine parents if they keep their kids home from school. And I do want to give Jeffco a little bit of props because you can opt to be 100% online, and you can opt to keep your kids home, go 100% online. But and there's no togetherness on this. So even that, it's like if you go to school, it's because you're most likely because your parents believe one way and they're going to send you to school.
Right.
And if you're not and you're learning at home and you're learning in a different way, it's most likely because your parents believe something different about this virus, and they're going to keep you home because I believe it's a safer environment for my children, and I don't want my kids bringing this home to my parents.
Right. And now if you throw on top of that political wrangle, you throw the whole political wrangle of mask on top of that, of
Yeah.
whether you should wear a mask or not. And if you wear a mask, you have one thought process. And if you don't wear a mask, you have another thought process. And so there goes the problem. And it gets increasingly worse as we move down the track, so to speak, because what's going to be next? And in some cases, it's already been there from a while back. Looking at what kind of car you drive. If you drive this kind of car, you have a certain political slant. If you drive this, you have another political slant. And so, we are trying to influence people with ideas that are expedient for someone, but it's most definitely in a lot of cases, if not most cases, expedient for the humanity and planet. And I mean, we go on in terms of the uniformity, or not uniformity, but the universality of what we're trying to do is have a harmonious life
Yeah.
and be able to live where people do have their own uh, free will or free ability to think, but not use it as a whooping post
Right.
at the demise of 100,000 people
Right. Yes. Or more.
or more. Yeah, yeah,
I,
131, I think, counting in the United States at least.
in the United States, and I'm pretty sure we're over a half a million worldwide
Yeah,
at this point. Something.
yep,
So at some point, it feels to me like at some point everything came to be about making the other guy wrong.
yes,
And The old days, news came across, you didn't have this 24-hour access. You didn't have this constant, constant state. Like there is this running series of blabby, blab, 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 blab bullshit that just constantly inundates our mind.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Twitter, right? I, there's so many quote news outlets out there now that don't actually do any investigation, don't do any research into their stories. They just quote report that so and so put out this tweet,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so said that this about that tweet, and so else said this about that tweet, and now all of a sudden that's the truth.
Yeah.
That's news. That's the law. It's
And the interesting about Twitter is, and a lot of other things, they use the title "It was reported," which means basically somebody said, uh, and when you have such a small space to write about this thing that somebody supposedly saw or heard, you can't give the context you need to put it in perspective. And so the person, if they're very shrewd with their words, they can slant that thing, even if they did see it, because the medium is so small in terms of the length. You can sway it any way you want. You can give half truths and part truths, and before you know it, we got a whole group of people up in arms. And when you see the actual footage, if you will, or you hear the actual conversation, it was nothing like it got reported.
right.
And because sometimes now I will flip through different news networks. I'll go through CNN and Fox and MSNBC and the ABCs and CBS and NBCs of the world. Sometimes I'm like, they cannot be talking about the same story.
Yeah,
And
I
I know
agree with
that.
you.
And I was going to say, and I know they're each taking different parts of the story, but again, it's not in context.
Yep. There's a chart out there that floats around. It looks like kind of like a pyramid, and the chart is the left, right, and validity, let's say, or truthfulness of various media outlets.
Right.
And I've actually got a copy of that pinned up behind my monitor on the wall. So anytime I look at a source, anytime I look at a news story, I can look up and go, oh, okay, I know where I'm kind of. Let me go see. And I've personally done that with stories where you look at the far right and how did you get that from that incident? Now I
Yeah.
don't see right, and I get it. The far right is going to look at that story, is going to look at the left's version of that story, and they're saying the same thing. How did you get that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I,
and the interesting thing is what you said earlier, in that we want to believe that we live in this world of categorically right and wrong.
yeah,
And so when we look at, and I know, there's a lot of people going to say, okay, we're going to go down the relativity or relativeness thing, but there are, I would suggest that there are very few things in the universe that are 100% black and white, because we know that, especially in a world of mathematics, that if you're looking at it from that perspective, everything can be reduced down to a smaller element of itself.
right,
And so when what happens at the total body level, something totally different is happening at the cellular level. And so now we have this push and pull, if you will, of what's good for the body may not be good for the cell, or vice versa. And so now we have to find that balance.
right,
We have to find that point where we are able to have different opinions, different ideas, and not have them be about trying to convince you that you are right and I am wrong. That should be a product of you presenting the facts or the truth, and then as an open-minded, intelligent, truth seeking in terms of how do we continue life, at the end of the day, I will come to the conclusion you have a good point. I need to consider that.
Right. It's and COVID, the quarantine, all this stuff really has just amplified this divide that's been here, that's been going on. This isn't anything new.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just gotten to a boiling point
Yeah.
in the last few months. COVID. So once again, I don't. People will probably jump all over my ass for this, but and I don't like seeing the planet lose 500,000 people. I don't like seeing 500,000 people gone from this planet. And I was taught 20 years ago, when you see something horrific, something you can't comprehend, something you can't imagine what's going on, we've got to move to a place of living to find the collateral good.
Yes.
I was taught this when the Twin Towers came down in 9/11, on 9/11. Within, I actually heard this whole concept the next night in a class on the 12th in a class. And we were asked, what's the collateral good that comes from that event? And it also was shared with us that it might be 10 years before we can find that collateral good.
Yeah.
It might be years before we really recognize the collateral good that comes from slowing an economy down, from keeping a people safe, from all the different decisions that we have made moving through this. And I remember 3, 4 months ago now, when this all got started, there was a meme and an idea that said, look, if we do this right, in 3 months, we're all going to look like idiots because it'll look like we didn't need to do any of it. And then everybody's going to scream and yell that this was a hoax because, look, all that doom and gloom didn't happen.
Right.
Yes, because
Right.
we actually buckled down and did what was asked of us. And we didn't do that.
No.
And America is seeing thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of cases every day, when other countries are seeing single and tens of cases a day.
And when you was going into that, I had this thought, and I thought about there's a gentleman named Jay Forster, who was a professor at MIT, and he's kind of considered the father of system thinking or system dynamics. Um, and one of the principal points that he makes is that cause and effect are not always closely related,
Right.
and that the human mind can only keep maybe 5 to 7 element system straight in their head, and after that we're going beyond, and so he uses this classical example of foxes and rabbits, and when rabbits increase, fox increase, and when rabbits decrease, fox decrease, and so you have that, and that's pretty easy to keep track of. Now you throw another element in, you throw a predator of the fox, let's say a wolf, and now you get that, and then you throw something of the wolf, now we have 4, and now you throw in drought or water shortage. You cannot begin to keep track of all that to keep the balance and the equilibrium. So now we have created a world where cause and effects have to be close related.
Yeah.
And so we begin not to look in the long term. What's expedient right now? And we
Yeah.
get ourselves in trouble because the system is doing what it does. It's equalizing and stabilizing the homeostasis aspect, and we miss it. And that's what's happening a little bit now with this. We're so caught up in this short-term political cause and effect right now, and it seems that very few of us, or very few of the leaders anyway, are looking at the long game
Yeah.
and how this system will play out.
If you're wearing a mask, you're automatically vilified for being living in fear and being a liberal, and if you're not wearing a mask, you're automatically labeled a Republican and a conservative because you're and judged as heretic because you're potentially, harming or putting everyone else at risk.
Yeah, or not listening to the science.
Or not right, or denying the science. It's folks, I will say it again and again. We started here 3 months ago. It's a very interesting time to be alive.
Yeah.
And 3, 4 months ago, we were saying that because nobody knew what the hell was going on. Nobody knew what to expect. Unfortunately, now, 3 months later, everybody's a friggin' expert on this thing. Everybody knows what to do. Everybody knows that the government's lying. Everybody knows that these guys are crooks. Everybody knows that those guys are. It doesn't matter what side what perspective you come from anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
We're all brainwashed to some degree. We're
Yeah.
all being brainwashed. Um, I trust, except for, well, but here's the way out, right? Here's what I think is the way out. We have to trust our intuition. We have to take everything, we have to look at everything that comes into our lives and immediately assume that it's not the truth, but that there could be some truth in there. And I've got to read 20 articles to get the truth because I've got to come to consensus. I've got to see that there is a consensus. I saw another meme where somebody said, I get the feeling that anybody at the WHO and the WHO and the CDC have no idea what they're doing and they're making it up as they go along. Well, guess what, folks? They were.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we never saw this before.
Yeah, and when you said that, two thoughts popped into my mind. The first is this whole idea we live in. We heard this expression: we live in the 360-degree world. Well, there are 360 degrees of that circle, and so depending on where you are on that circle, you will get a different perspective. And so that's the truth of the matter. The other part is, I heard this statement that said, until further notice, everything is a half truth.
Mm.
And so when you get this information, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to do some research before we accept it or begin to act on it. And most definitely before we start broadcasting it to other people, because we may be sending them down a path that is not beneficial to them or anybody else.
There we go. When you hit share on Facebook, it should give you a pop-up that said, have you done your research?
Yes.
Yes. Please list 3 independent websites you visited to confirm this story prior to sharing.
Yes.
And maybe we can get rid of these fact checking.
Yes.
No.
Let's not have half truth. At best, let's try to get at least to 3/4 of the truth, right? I mean, we're leaning in the right way. We may not get to 100 because of where we are, but we need to be that.
Folks, we've done it again, and we've come to a great new topic, and we've done it again. We've gotten to the end of our half hour, but it leads us to a deeper part of the conversation. I've heard it referred to as the fact that we're living in a post-truth world.
Yeah, I've heard truth decay.
Truth decay, yes. Where'd you see that one? See?
Yeah, from RAND organization, so think tank out in California.
Yes, and they're using that term, truth decay. So we're all suffering from truth decay, folks. We're living in a world where it's incredibly imperative to dig deeper, believe, trust and listen to our intuition, but really do the work of digging deeper before we propagate. Well, let's call it what it is: fake news.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We're going to get out of here for today. Z, thank you so much for being with me this morning. This is always so much fun.
Always, always.
And I trust, folks, that you're finding something that serves you along your journey this weekend and into next week. We're here every Friday morning, new episodes. The program's called Ministers Talking Shit, and it's part of the New Thought Media Network. Big shout out to everyone that makes New Thought Media Network possible. We'll be back again with you next week. So until then, peace and blessings. Be
Peace and
prosperous.
blessings.